So the next thing we're going to look at is the nose, so where we would sort of look for major landmarks in the nose and how we can sort of think about it. I'm just going to go back. I think I'll use these three. It's got about half an hour left. It seems like doing these three would be a good kind of blend. Yeah, so we'll start with the nose with this one. In terms of the forms of the nose, we've already talked a lot about up here, this sort of keystone shape, which kind of connects, it's sort of connecting to the eyes, and that's the whole point of this shape here. It connects all the forms together because it's the sort of the left hand right hand side of it is connects down into all this eye stuff we've been looking at. The top of it connects to the forehead, which we already talked a lot about, and then the bottom of it connects to the nose. But we can sort of think the bridge of the nose then starts to project forward at about that point. As I said, usually the first mark I would put in for a nose is actually usually a sort of generalization, but just to kind of mark across the base of the nose. So where the nose projects out of the face. Not the tip of the nose, but the actual kind of projecting point. So where the bottom of the nose angles back, meets the front of the top lip, and then the top lip angles down. That's always a really good starting point for the nose from any angle. So if I just briefly open this guy back up because he's from quite a different angle. We obviously see a lot different. I'll just put a light layer over him as well. We obviously get a really different angle from him, but I would still start with my first mark for the nose being the base of his nose. So the base of the nose through here. For his eyes, we've already got the sort of center line of his eyes, and then center of his mouth. But yeah, the base of the nose, that's the landmark we find for his nose. One thing actually to talk about with this guy just briefly, and we'll get into this a bit in the next session. He's a very good example of the importance of tilt. So when we're looking below or at an angle at a head, we start to get into sort of maybe more obscure tilts. These are all quite nice, fairly straightforward. There's a slight tilt in this guy. You can sort of see all the forms all angle back together, whereas she's more straight on. So her eyes are straight across, her nose is straight across, her mouth is straight across. But they're all parallel. So tilt is always parallel. If we go back to this guy, even though he's in a really awkward sort of angle, quite a tricky angle, something that will really help you is you can sort of see very clearly the base of his nose, if we drew a straight line through it, matches that tilt through his eyes and matches the tilt through his mouth and the tilt through his chin and the tilt through his forehead. So those lines are all moving together. If he was tilting his head even further, they'd still always move together. So it's really important just to be aware of tilt and the importance of it. But you can see there's a strong tilt on his nose. But yeah, so with him I would still start with the base of the nose. You can see that's the bottom of that keystone that matches the tilt of. And so they're the sort of two landmarks on him. We might go back to him briefly actually to talk about noses because he's got an interesting angle. But we'll do these ones first. So the first mark would just be a basic sort of line through the base of her nose. The next thing I would want to find is just a sense of what's the width of her nose. So the width of the nose goes back to that cavity. We spoke about that a lot. But that cavity of the nose tends to be where you get a slight kind of bulging out. So probably the cavity sits a little bit further in because the nostrils flare out a little bit and then they angle back in. But the sides of the nostrils basically are the next kind of port of call in terms of drawing that nose shape. Now I tend to find, beyond this point working with the nose, the way noses are lit, unless there's a strong light on one side of the nose, so maybe, does this guy have it? Yeah, he's got a shadow on that side of the nose. Unless there's a strong shadow, I don't worry too much about anything going on in the center of the nose at the beginning of the drawing. I would then go in, this would be lightly sketched in, go in and find the shape at the base of the nose, particularly the bottom of the nostril, basically where the nostrils would lie in, and where the shadow sits. So for her, she's very sort of lightly lit. The shadow is only maybe about this much of the base of her nose. But generally, if you then find the sort of shadow underneath the nose, that immediately makes the nose sort of project forward. So that's pretty much often where I would start. After that, when you start going into the forms within the shadow, you would then find, if you find within that that occlusion shadow I was talking about, where the nostril is a lot darker, separate that out from the general shadow tone of the nose, the bottom of the nose. A lot of the forms of the nose sort of start to function together pretty well. Secondarily, so once we actually would start getting into rendering more of the forms of the nose, so with her we'd be working in halftones, and this would be a bit later in the drawing. You want to just be aware of where are the sides of the front plane of the nose. Generally, the front plane of the nose, as I say, will bulge out a little bit at the tip, then it'll angle back in, and then the nostrils will have sort of a front plane, a visible front plane, and then they'll angle back in again. So you end up with these forms basically make up the nose. So this is the side plane, front plane, and that, I'll go back up to this, sort of where the keystone angles back up. But you can see those forms basically if I lay that over. So this is the side plane. I'll make it a bit lighter. That's the sort of side plane of the nose, and then everything else is kind of like a front plane facing forwards basically. But hopefully that's fairly clear in terms of structure of the nose there. So this is where we're talking about planes. So if we're trying to simplify the nose, you've got this front plane, which is light, side plane, which is slightly darker. The nostril then we get an angle back in. So if I draw a kind of contour line, it kind of angles back down, then it's flat again, then it's back down. So that's the sort of, if we're laying a contour over it, it sort of functions roughly that way. As I say, with her, she's not she's very sort of evenly lit, so it's not as obvious as it is on some other noses. I might swap to a different nose actually to go through this because it's a bit clearer. But you get an idea of, so through the center of the nose, that's where that highlight is. The front plane is lighter, the side plane is darker, and that side plane you can see connects to that little shape we made for the eye. So that's the side plane of the nose, then that front kind of flat plane of the eye, and then the eye starts to angle back forward again. So you can start to see how those forms are kind of interacting with each other. So we swap to this guy, do the same thing. So we want to find base of his nose, and we have an idea of where the top of his nose is there. Side plane there. We don't see the side plane on the other side, it's in shadow, but we've got the tip of his nose. So starting point is basically the width of the nose and the height of the nose. I mean, this is generally the starting point of anything. So when we first start the portrait, we find the height of the portrait and the width of the portrait. And then when we start to look at forms, we find the height of the nose and the width of the nose, or the height of the mouth and the width of the mouth. We already looked at the height roughly of those shapes that occupy the eye versus their width, and so on. So we've got the width of the nose, the top. Then after that, we find the shadow shape that makes up the base of the nose. So shadow shape that makes up the base of the nose there, and then on him we have a slightly clearer side plane because it's in shadow. So we've got this side plane in shadow, runs all the way down there, but on the other side the side plane is not in shadow, but we can sort of see that the highlight of the front of the nose roughly matches it, and then we can see these forms. So that little, again, the spacing, making sure there's enough spacing for the forms in the front of the nose. So that gives us the front nose form. Through there. And his nostril, there's not a massive kind of tonal variation, but it's good to be sort of aware of. So that's the nostril shape, and then this is the sort of front plane of the nose shape there. So that's our front plane and that's our side plane. And they're not, if I drop this off, they're not a huge, there's not a huge value difference. What really indicates that there's a difference is the fact that there's a highlight that runs down the center, that kind of angle change. That's pretty much his nose, this guy's nose sorted in terms of structure. So then if we move to this profile, it's a little bit different. Again, you would still start with the base, so that's the base of the nose there. I've already got sort of the top of his nose, the bridge of the nose drawn in. Then we would find the back of the nostril, so that's the same as when we found this guy's sort of back nostril. Back of the nostril there, tip of the nose, and we would want to find what's the shape of it basically. And so from there we've got, once we've got the tip of the nose and the back, we can then sort of place in all the other shapes. Can sort of place a little bit of that shadow there, so you can see, if I just draw over it, where the shadow is at the base of the nose. And that's pretty much it. We don't see too much of the front plane of this guy's nose, maybe the ever so tiniest in a sense of it. We see a lot more of the side plane, but you can see the side plane then kind of connects up. And we're just looking at the side plane of the nose, and then this is the front plane of the cheek. So this is kind of moving in one direction, and then the cheek is moving in a different direction. So it's sort of there and then across, or sort of there and across. And that's how the nose is sort of projecting forward. Yeah, and then I'm going to have a look, so we should have enough time. Just this guy's nose is quite interesting to look at. It's got the base there. Again, we would try to find the width. So we've got the back width. We see the nostril on this side. We don't quite see where it connects, but we've got that nostril. We would then find what's the shape at that shadow at the base of the nose. And I can shade that in. Then the front plane, follows that form. We can see how the side plane projects. And he's not got, some people have more or less kind of deep creases in their nostril, not a super deep crease in his nostril. So what we end up with pretty much is kind of like quite a blocky nose projecting forward. But you can see how that nose works. If we were to, when we start elaborating it, if I kind of enhance where the nostrils are placed, it starts to give a bit more structure to it, the bottom of the nostril. But you can see how that nose is kind of, as a set of planes, is projecting forward. So if I kind of go back through all of them, you can see those same sets of planes. We've got the front planes, side planes, base plane, front planes, side planes, base planes. We just mostly see the side planes on this guy. The front plane is the contour essentially. Then the base plane we do see a little bit of, and the front plane, side planes, and base plane.